Now, I stand out a little bit at SPUC. Unlike effectively everyone else, I'm a Protestant. Shock horror. And not only that, I worship in the Church of England. Now, please, don't turn off the video. Because if you bear with me, I'm going to do something you'll probably like. I'm going to criticise it. Not just a superficial critique of the quite frankly evil Archbishop-elect, but of something even graver. The decimation of the eternal image of the Church that was started at the Lambeth Conference of 1930. If you don't know what that is, you're about to find out. I'm Ben Weller, and this is Viewpoint. Every 10 years, the Archbishop of Canterbury is expected to convene the world's Anglican bishops in the Lambeth Conference. The overarching goal is to decide the Church's line on the issues of the day that are plaguing the world. There have been conferences with a main focus on ecumenism, war, colonialism, missionary work, the environment, women's ordination, and the thing I'll be covering today, contraception. The so-called Roaring Twenties was a time of rapid social change. Hedonistic living was in the public eye for the first time, and its cultural fallout had started to percolate throughout every class of society. So when the decennial Lambeth Conference came around in 1930, after urgent requests from British and American clergy for some guidance, the then Archbishop, Cosmo Lang, convened it to discuss a very hot topic that had arisen in the decade before: birth control. It was the first time any organised church or denomination had sat to properly hash out the topic. And what did it do? It wrought havoc. It was a disaster and started the progressive landslide that we've been riding ever since. Thanks to the decisions of the bishops 95 years ago, we are sat in a heap at the bottom, surrounded by abortion, IVF, prostitution, divorce, pornography, surrogacy, and a general licentiousness that has stripped any sense of taboo from perversion. Of course, I'm not blaming today's situation on the well-meaning Archbishop. Lang was, after all, famous for refusing to crown King Edward VIII after his insistence to marry Wallis Simpson, a double divorcee. Alas, the fact remains that the Church fell to a defeatist idea of if you can't beat them, join them. In 1904, an organisation called the National Council of Public Morals was established. It was an ecumenical social purity movement that had aims that at least I would see as very noble. They commissioned 2 reports into the falling birth rates in England, and their second, in 1925, was chaired by the King's physician, Lord Dawson of Penn. Despite the report never taking an overtly pro-birth control stance, they did say that it was not just impossible to reverse contraception use once it was already widespread, but that it was idle to condemn indiscriminately that which is practiced universally, adding that the job of the Church was now to ennoble it through knowledge and conscience. He also mentioned that he saw mothers as broken by repeated childbirth. Now, we can't forget that whilst Dawson carried the nominal Christianity that the majority of the British aristocracy carried at the time, he did have some dark affiliations that mean he may not have been the neutral mediator that the report needed. Not only was he a member of the British Eugenics Society, but after his death in 1945, it was revealed that he had euthanized King George V, injecting him with a lethal mixture of morphine and cocaine, so his death could be in the morning papers rather than the evening ones, explaining the late King's famous last words, "God damn you," that he uttered to Dawson's nurse as she injected the mixture into him. Now, it was the findings of this report that acted as another prompt for the C of E to have contraception discussed at the 1930 conference. And this was music to the ears of a growing cohort of Modernist bishops who had been trying to foist their views of a social gospel on the Church for decades. The main talking points of these Modernists during the debate were lifted from a work written a few years earlier, A.R. Vidler's Essays on Liberality, to give some sort of foundation to the things they were spouting. One bishop quoted Vidler by saying, "It's not by clinging to the letter of tradition that we are loyal to the faith of our fathers, but by seeking to express that faith in the idiom of our own age." Intentional parenthood as it was called, was seen as responsible stewardship. If Christianity were a solely helpful philosophy for keeping social order, they'd have had a morsel of ground to stand on. But when these people are supposed to be the overseers of thousands of worshippers of the eternal, unchanging Creator, they sound at best ignorant and at worst subversive. I understand wholeheartedly their desire to take faith out of the abstract and see an application of it in society, but why would one fight to overlay a fabrication of that faith when you can just preach truth? What they should have known, and what we here know, is that truth does not unfold with human progress. Truth is unchanging and fully revealed, and we operate within it. After an entire week of debate, the motion was strengthened, adding in clauses about consulting the Holy Spirit and the reiterating that there must be a morally permissible reason for using birth control. During the discussion and later vote, there are stories of multiple bishops breaking into tears, many trying to balance what seemed to be a betraying of the people they serve and a betrayal of the gospel and natural law. Of some 300 bishops present, less than half actually voted, with many abstaining or walking out of the chamber. It eventually passed by a very small margin, though some bishops even refused to sign the resolution once passed, as is proper. One bishop who did sign the motion said it was undertaken with a heavy heart and with a heavy hand. This was a watershed moment, not just in Christendom, but in British society, and the fallout was significant. The story remained in the press for weeks, starting a national conversation about contraception that had never before happened. While the Church's cultural influence was starting to decrease in the post-war period, it was just about early enough to be a green light to the chattering classes of British society. Middle-class respectability had been given to an issue that used to be seen as the domain of the fringe revolutionaries, like the evil Mary Stopes. In the words of sex historian Leslie A. Hall, the Church of England didn't create the family planning movement, but it made it a respectable aspect of social medicine. Inside the Church, there were reactions too. The Bishop of Durham, Hensley Henson, said the mind of the Church has never known such peril, predicting the slippery slope I alluded to at the start that pro-lifers have come to know all too well. Even Lang, in private letters, bitterly mourned the decision he once tentatively supported. In a letter to his predecessor, Randall Dawson, he said, "I sometimes fear we have loosed forces we cannot easily restrain." Prophetic comments from the two of them. A shame it was too late. In the 1968 Lambeth Conference, 38 years on, the Church of England said that contraception was fully morally acceptable. The caution of the 1930s motion was gone. Whilst across the Tiber, Pope Paul VI issued Humani Vitae, in Canterbury the loosed forces Lang spoke of broke free from their shackles. Perversion was excused fully on the grounds of good intent. Nobody remembers the 1968 decision. It was irrelevant. The Church had lost her gravitas and her power. Her authority hinged on the 1930 decision, and she bottled it. In 2001, historian Callum Brown, in his book The Death of Christian Britain, said that the Lambeth Conference stands as a turning point in Britain's moral history. The moment when the language of sin began to yield to the language of responsibility. In other words, when the language of God began to yield to the language of the world. We are still seeing the fruit of this decision. A culture that has turned away from valuing parenthood and children. Free contraception, abortion, plummeting birth rates, rampant extramarital sex. The Church legitimised it by one slight compromise. I'd love them to start to build back, but I think the C of E have proven they're not in the habit of reversing progressive decisions yet. I hope God surprises me.